good, yeah. We just got off the phone with Tom from Run Films Connect. Run Films Connect is a Facebook group run by Tom, also the name of his YouTube channel. And both of us are really interested in running and filmmaking, so we got together to have a bit of a chat about exactly that. We talked in the end about three main things, I think it was. Probably first thing was the importance of storytelling in making a film. Second was just how important it is to plan your story and to plan out your film before you actually head out for the run. And the third thing was about composing the shots when you're actually out running and working out what to film. So I hope you'll find that really interesting. This is what we just been talking about for about the last 45 minutes or so. So I've pieced together a bit of that for you today, and I'll show you that to you now.
Hi Flo!
Hey Tom, how are you?
So good to see you. I'm going to fire away and we're going to
Fire away, Tom.
What makes an interesting story?
I'd say what makes an interesting story is something that is fairly easy to understand. A common thread throughout the whole, in this case like throughout a whole video. And I think the structure of it's important as well, and you hear it in a lot of different places, but a story needs a beginning, a middle and an end. Usually it works in those sort of three parts, and I think that's the same for whether it's a book or a film or any sort of story really. It seems to revolve around that, having a beginning and a middle and an end. And quite often, I mean, it's like writing an essay, you know, where you had to have an introduction and then the body, and a few problems arise and then the resolution of those and then a conclusion at the end. And I think that's kind of how it works really. And I think that's what we try to do with varying degrees of success, I'd say. Oh, and one thing that I didn't mention here that's really important is that although a story has to have a beginning, a middle and an end, it doesn't necessarily have to start at the chronological beginning of the actual story. So it doesn't need to start with you tying on your shoes before you head out for a run. I think what is really interesting to look at are some books, and
yeah, I really like this one here. Or
oh yeah, by Lizzie Hawker's Runner, yeah.
And this is nice too.
Where they don't necessarily start at the very beginning, but I think what Lizzie Hawker does, for example, and what a lot of other people do, particularly Rosie Swale Pope here in Just a Little Run Around the World, is that they start with a high point in the story. Is that it's often just before the most interesting thing that is going to happen in the whole book.
So how did storytelling evolve for your channel?
A lot of YouTube channels revolve around the person, and for us the channel was conceived of as a way of highlighting and showing Tasmania, where we live. And it wasn't really about us, and we weren't really, I remember in the very first video we didn't even really show our faces that much, and you know, you often saw us from behind, and it wasn't really about us. So even trying to tell a story is pretty difficult to do, I guess, if you're not even showing yourself in the video all that much. I mean, there was us sort of running by. So that's sort of how we started. We just wanted to show the places that we ran in and how fantastic it is out there in Tasmania and the great places you can run. And then with time, I think you might remember back at the beginning of the year, we entered a competition, making competition. Yeah. And I think it became clear to us then that to make more engaging films and to get people and want to be interested in the places you're running, you need to have that human element in it. And I suppose since the beginning of the year, we've tried to overcome our reluctance to be out in front of the camera and speak to the camera and do all those things that YouTubers are meant to do, you know, present themselves. But still, I think the difficulty for us is to do it in such a way that it's still about Tasmania, it's still about where we're running, and we just provide some context to that, rather than trying to make it about us and by the way, you know, we're running in a beautiful place.
Right. So how do you come up with your stories?
That's become a big part of it, I think, in the last couple of months, I'd say. And so it's not all in the old days, well, in the old days was a year ago, I suppose, a bit over a year ago, it was about where can we run and where can we run that we haven't run before, and we'll show that. And then in more recent times, it seems to be we need to put that into some context. It needs to be, why are we running there? And very often what I think we do is we often talk about this in German, Sauerteiggeschichte, a sourdough story, where you take a little bit of what's happened before and refer to it in the next film. So, that we were here before, but I don't know, it was too windy, we couldn't use the drone, so we want to go back, that sort of thing. That there was often to refer back to something that we've done before, which puts it into a chronological and historical kind of a context as well as maybe also giving you a good opportunity to use some clips from before as well, rather than always having to have new stuff, which, you can end up, especially if you're filming in 4K, you can end up with just masses and masses of archived material.
Yeah, I noticed that you do weave in a lot of your older images and clips, and it really ties the story together, and it's so fun to see when you, like you said, we were here before, but it was so snowy, and then you always do a great job of switching to that clip, and then to provide the context, so that's neat.
Yeah, I noticed you're doing something similar too in your last triathlon film, where you wove in some of the stuff from your training swim as well. So it's pretty useful to have a bit of that B-roll tucked away, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. You just gotta keep it organized.
That's my difficulty. Yeah.
So do you sometimes plan
planning the story ahead of time? If you'd asked me a couple of months ago, I'd have said we don't do that at all. We just sort of go there and run and then see what the common denominator is throughout the whole thing, or what is one point that we want to draw and tease out. There sort of needs to be a common thread through the whole story, I think, through the whole film, whatever that happens to be. But I think it's nice to have some idea of why you're going to the place you're going before you do it. Because especially if you're going to talk to the camera while you're out. I think before we used to go out, talk to the camera, and then realise that the story that you were telling while you were out running is not really the story that you wanted to use, or that when you get back and look at the footage, you realise, well, it actually wasn't about whatever it is I was talking about up there on the mountain. It's more about something else. So we do try to plan it more before we go out now, but I'd say most of the deciding of what that story is going to be about comes about when we're back here sitting at the desk in front of all the footage. And because I think often you don't really know what the story is going to be. I mean, things will happen, of course, that you don't know are going to happen, like almost losing the drone, or running out of time when you're coming back and it gets dark, and those sort of things. But also when you're looking at the footage, you realise that in the background there's something else going on that you just wouldn't have planned on, or you want to concentrate on one particular part of the film, or the story rather. So we don't plan it too much. I'd say there was maybe about 20% planning and 80% good luck or bad luck. I think bad luck often seems to go down better than good luck.
Yeah, that was one of your best viewed was one wrong decision, I think is what you titled.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Really good.
Yeah.
What recommendations do you have for other people? Others are going to be watching this, and I think one thing that your channel does is it's really, really solid at providing something new to look forward to. Every time that I log on, I know there's going to be some story, something that's entertaining beyond, you do a great job with the transitions and the filming and the edits and all these things, but it's a story that ties it together. And I think when you guys provide some human touch, you were at the market one day and it ain't no lazy Sunday.
Yeah.
And just these different things that the human touch and drawing that story have really developed, I think, in your channel very, very well. So what would you say would be maybe a recommendation to somebody else who's trying to tell a story as it relates to running or life or vlogging, so that it's not just a bobblehead talking to a camera about this is how many miles I went?
Yeah. I like to watch a lot of landscape photography channels. So there's a guy called Thomas Heaton who I've been following for quite a while now, and he does it just really nicely. He's just a really down-to-earth guy. It's him walking out into the countryside looking to get an image, and he doesn't take a lot of images. He maybe gets one or two photos per session, and he goes out to a different place each time. I'd say in terms of influences, I'd say I probably wasn't influenced too much by other big running channels. There are other people that do things really well, and trying to copy that really works out too well, I don't think. I just do what I find interesting, and if other people find it interesting, then great, you know. And it's you know, it's obviously what we're doing is not the world's most popular thing. Otherwise, we'd have more subscribers. But you know, I don't necessarily want to do it any other way. I don't want to spend all my time with the camera and speaking into the camera and showing just a little bit of running or something, or a little bit of the landscape, because I don't think I'm that interesting for people to listen to. So, and there's people out there who are better runners and know more about training and how to run fast and all of that sort of stuff. For me, I think it's not about trying to get views or trying to get subscribers. It's just doing what we find interesting, because in the end, it's hard to stick to something if you don't find it interesting yourself, if you don't find it satisfying or doing what you really want to do. You're only doing it because you notice that it's what other people want, you know. In the end, you've got to do what you want. Trying to always do something different is what we... I think we have to do. I think we have to change things regularly, or I don't know whether everybody's like that, probably, but you just get bored doing the same thing, and if you're bored doing it, then you sort of wonder how anybody else could possibly find it interesting, just doing the same thing all the time. I think almost every week we find ourselves at a bit of a crossroads, wondering what it is that we're going to be doing next week, or how we're going to change it for next week to keep it interesting for ourselves primarily, but then also, I guess, for others as well.
You're also one of the only husband-wife teams that I think I've seen. You know,
yeah. Apart from the race that we were in there together, we've only got maybe 2 videos where we're actually running together, because of, you know, child-minding duties. It means that one's got to stay home with the child unless we take her with us. And there's a couple of runs up on a couple of recent runs actually up on YouTube where a daughter was actually with me when we were doing it. So they are sometimes there as well, even though you don't see them. But I think it started off as a husband and wife kind of thing because of the nature of the race that we did last year, the Transalpine, where you actually had to run together, and you had to arrive at each aid station and leave each aid station together and arrive in the finish line of every stage, and then the final stage together, otherwise it wouldn't count. It's been pretty interesting trying to do that together, and takes a bit of the weight off too, of my shoulders, having to always see myself when I'm editing. I get to edit some of Flo's stuff, and her filming's come on really well. She's produced some really nice, just beautiful shots, I think, in the last little while, of different feeling for light and for movement in the camera and that sort of thing. It's been, for me, that's been really good to see how she's improved. I think the last one that she filmed would have been the one with the flooded basement, where she filmed all of the running, pretty much all of them. I mean, I took the GoPro with me, but we didn't end up using much of that, and we just used the stuff from the DSLR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably interesting for you too, because you're doing all the editing, correct?
Yeah.
So then you don't even know what kind of footage you're going to get until it's right there in front of you.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about what we like, and we talk about, you know, composition and that sort of thing. So we know where we like, if there's going to be a sun or there's going to be a runner in the frame, where that runner's going to be, or leading lines and intersection of thirds and all of those sorts of typical composition things that people talk about in photography. So plays into filmmaking as well. So yeah.
So we've talked stories, but I think you just hit on a really, really good part, because most of us aren't that good at taking pictures. You guys seem to have a real talent. And have you studied, or just through practice or reading, or how did you get to be? I still remember when I said, why don't you just carry the camera with you?
Yeah, that's right.
Said, I like to compose my shots. And it just dawned on me like, oh, yeah, that does make sense.
Well, if I look back to the early films, you think you just hold the camera out in front of you and walk along and it's going to be great. But especially with the GoPro, it just... Here's one lying around here. It just jiggles around so much when you're carrying it. It looks horrible, really. And most of the footage, I try to do a summary video of the race leading up to this race. And just looking back at the footage, there's not very much that I would want to use now. But even though the landscape was absolutely fantastic, but you pull out the camera and you quickly do it while you're trying to climb up a mountain, and it just doesn't turn out well. At least didn't turn out well for me. And I don't find my face so interesting that I think that people are going to want to look at it for 5-10 minutes,
Right.
Other people have probably got better faces.
Talk to me about your filming strategies. How do you compose a shot?
I don't like to have the runner necessarily, unless there's some nice symmetry that you're working on. I don't like to have the runner just in the middle. It's interesting, but if you're running by yourself and you're holding the camera that way, it's either pointed at you or it's pointed in front. And I find... For me, when I'm watching videos, if I'm just watching a trail, even if it's smooth, and there's no person in that shot, I don't find it interesting. If I'm composing a shot, I like, and I'm sure there's heaps of people that know more about it than I do and would say that it's all rubbish, but I like to use the landscape and the runner as part of that leading line, so that it's running towards something that's interesting, and so the runner is drawing your attention to something in the background possibly. And then there's 3 types of shots. There's the establishing shot from above, which is what a drone I guess is good for. The drone shows you, well, here I am. This is the landscape I'm running through. I don't think a drone is not an answer to everything. Just sticking lots of drone shots and it's going to be a good film. I think they're good for establishing shots and good for those of us that don't have a gimbal. And then there's that closer shot where you're seeing the runner in the landscape, and then there's those other shots, those really close shots, tied up shots where you see maybe just a really small part of the landscape, like a plant or something with a foot going by. So there's sort of those 3 levels that we kind of use.
Oh, that's really good. I've never even thought about those 3 elements, but now that you say it, I think through some shots you guys will just show your feet or your legs,
Yeah, things like I can't think what it's called, like a J cut or something they talk about, where the audio of the next clip starts before the cut. Then that mimics what happens in a normal conversation, where you hear something and then turn your head to look at it. And that is a nice way of producing transitions and that make it less sort of like just a jump cut, But I don't know, I think too much gets talked about editing and transitions, and it's, in the end, I mean, they're cool, but that's all they are really. They're fun to do, but does it add anything really to the story? Probably not, I think sometimes it would do, like a zoom or something, which can take you nice if you've got a drone shot and then you've got a runner on the ground, like a quick zoom in, 6 frames on either side of the cut or something, or less than that. Works pretty well, but I find we're using less and less of those sort of things.
there's so many elements to your channel that I could say, well, let's talk about angles in filming. Let's talk about light, or let's talk about transitions, or let's talk about what's the After Effects.
Yeah, After Effects I just use, especially with maps and so on, and I've started to try and do that more three-dimensionally these days with I don't know whether people are interested in this, but we were sort of thinking of doing a video on this where we just take a photo off a map in like, I don't know, 30, 40 megapixels, and then animate that with a software camera so that it looks like the cameras or the map is moving and the camera is moving around the map to show where you are. But those sort of things I like. Whether they're necessary, I think probably the same thing you could say for a drone shot, like a map shot, like a shot of a map. It provides context. I just love them anyway. I just love maps. So I hope other people do too, you know.
I think they do, and it helps with us understanding Tasmania. Not that we're all that
Yeah.
familiar with it, but when you do a map shot and you show where you started or where you had to drive to, and then you ran this trail and went up this area,
Yeah.
it provides tons of context
Yeah.
because we can see it. Yeah, it's just like you said, context in a larger thing, and then drawing you in.
Yeah.
And most of your shots are usually running away from the camera, aren't there? Or do you-
It's true, yeah. And there's a whole branch of art. There's a Caspar David Friedrich, a German landscape artist who is famous for having this, it's called a Rückenfigur in German, where you have somebody standing facing out towards the landscape, you know, so you just see the person from the back, and that has a particular effect. I'm not sure whether, and we often work with 2 cameras or 3 cameras so that it's not so much, you can get pretty exhausting having to stop every, you know, when you see something nice to stick down the camera to run past it. So we often work with 2 cameras and just sort of draw out the 2 cameras and plonk them down, one facing one way and one the other way, and turn them on.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. So you'll put, or even like little one here, one here, one here, and then you can just run the whole way.
Yeah, often if occasionally we'll take three with us, but we don't have the 3 anymore because they got stolen. But we used to take 2 cameras, put them in together, one facing one way and the other one facing the other way, and then run out past it, and then stick in another camera, and then run back, get the other cameras, so and then run pick up the other camera. So there's not so much messing around as there normally would be. We always record in the highest resolution we possibly can. In fact, there's a really good video on this on Peter McKinnon's latest upload, I think, where he talks about, you know, why 4K, and it's not because the resolution, it's not because you really need these massively great pictures, but if you compress them down to 1080 when you export them, so the quality's so much better, but it also gives you all that freedom to move the frame that you want around inside that 4K. So you're not stuck to, here's my 1080, and I'm going to export at 1080, so it needs to be that big, and it just can't move. If you've something there you want to crop out, you can't crop it out because you'd be losing quality. So the nice thing about the 4K is you've got that ability to be able to move it around, crop stuff out, you know, have dolly shots and panning shots within that 4K. That you can sort of...
Yeah, you always have movement. Like every time I'm watching one of your films, there is, it's going this way and then it's going this way. Or there's so much motion that it's super engaging.
I think that's the beauty of using 4K, or even the if you've got or even the 2.7K is really nice.
Yeah.
But if we use the other cameras, we're using, so in the GoPro, I think the highest resolution is 3.8K. So it's, what is that called? Ultra UHD, I think, is what it is. And the other cameras that we use in the drone, we now use Cinema HD, which is a bit bigger, so it's slightly bigger than 4K. So you can blow it way up. You can really zoom in on stuff, but it just gives you so much ability to be able to move it around.
Well, hey, I've taken up a ton of your time. I sure appreciate you taking the time to talk and to visit. And it's always a pleasure getting to know someone else who's trying to do the same thing. So
Exactly, yeah. That's right, yeah. No, I think it's good. Having this this link with people across I think that's one of the nice things about it, isn't it? The way that it brings people together that otherwise would never really have anything to do with each other and never know that they exist. All right, Tom, good talking to you.
Good talking to you too. Have a good night.
All right, mate. All the best. Bye-bye. So we're just sitting here waiting for Tom from the States to call. Surrounded by a whole heap of mess, because we just had the flood a couple of weeks ago and everything's stored here, so ignore that if you can. I'll see whether I can get him back here on the computer, but it's telling me there's no microphone connected.